Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Study with You. I am your host, Cameron Gilmore. Listen, before you get into the actual interview, I wanted to give you an insight on why I brought on my guest. Listen, we are going to talk about a pandemic that has swept the globe and continues to sweep the globe. No, this is not a pill or a potion. This is not a drink. This is not a smoke. This is, in fact, pornography. Pornography is crushing young men, young women, adults. It's crushing families. It's crushing marriages. It's crushing the human soul and the mind. It is a pandemic that is sweeping this globe. Listen, the reason I was so jacked for having Josh on is because he is the face of combating pornography. Look, he goes in great depth. Listen, he talks about when he was a child being abused. He talks about the house of horrors, the physical abuse, the mental abuse that happened to him as a kid. He talked about at 12 years old, his cousin exposing him to porn and how he instantly, in a snap of a finger, was hooked on porn. And he goes into how pornography cost him his freedom for 6 months. 6 months. Could have been longer. It could have been a lot longer. Josh has written 4 books. But what I love about this interview, it's a 3-part interview. This is 3 parts. There are 3 episodes that are coming out because we go in great depth. Josh talks about his struggles. He talks about his issues. He talks about healing from within. There are so many of us that are still overcoming mental and emotional and physical abuse that happened to us as a young child. There are so many out there that just need something that says you can do it, you can push through it. And those of you that are still struggling with watching pornography, there is a better way. Listen, he goes in. I love what he talked about. Someone who truly is addicted to porn. He talks about how they're afraid to watch it. They feel disgusted. Not these people. I watch it. He said he watches it, 15, 20 times a day. Dude, come on. He laughs about this because people that are struggling with this, they're really, really struggling. And he goes in great depth of his own struggles. He goes in great depth of just combating everything. I already talked about that earlier. The reason why I have him on is he's written 4 books. 4 books that give us insight to who he is, gives us insight to the man that he has become. Josh does a phenomenal job of giving us detailed. He gives us insight. He gives us data on how this is a pandemic that is sweeping and has swept and will continue to sweep the globe unless we all come together and put a stop to it. It is a horrific, horrific, horrific disease. It is worse than pills and pains and alcohol. This disease is horrific. And I love having him on because he gives us just this amazing help and amazing push. He helps us understand and heal those of you that are still struggling. Those of you had, again, past trauma. Guys, this episode is going to be one you'll replay. Share with your children. Use your own discretion. Obviously, there's not depth. This is not, hey, this is what porn is, and goes in great detail about what it is. No, he goes in on the mental and emotional side of it. Oh, guys, this episode is one that when he accepted my invitation, I have been just on my edge of the seat because I could not wait to get him on. I couldn't get him on fast enough, but he's super busy. He's doing so much work overseas in the UK. And the one thing I'll leave you with is this. He goes into big, big detail about this new disease called PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction. PIED. It's incredible how this is destroying men. When he was going through and talking about it, I was shocked to listen to it. God, listen, you have to do what you got to do to overcome this pandemic. If you struggle with this, know you're not a bad person. You just need better tools. If you have lost freedom because of this, you can change. It's time to heal. It's time to look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not a bad person. I've just made choices that were not good. but it's now to take a stance and a choice to become better. That's the choice that you get to make. That's the choice that we get to make. That's the way we get to be grateful to be here another day. Oh man, I'm fired up, as you all can tell. I am fired up for this, guys. Enjoy this first of 3-part episode of Josh Shea on this episode and the 2 to follow of the Art Study of You. This one is going to rattle some cages. This one is going to turn some heads and cause a lot of people to take a step back and really evaluate themselves in the mirror. I met Josh virtually through LinkedIn. Joshua Shea is his full name. Give you a little bit of background about Josh. He's the CDO of Paddock Recovery. He's a certified betrayal trauma, pornographic addiction expert, 4-time author, and a coach. Josh is here to really dive in deep about pornography, the effects of it, his story behind what happened, how it almost cost him his freedom. It did for a little bit. We'll dive into that in depth. But Josh, we thank you so much for being part of the project, part of this episode. Please give us, introduce yourself. Take about 5 to 7 minutes. Give us a little bit about back history on you, where you grew up, ambitions in life, but more importantly, tell us your why.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm sure most people freak out when they hear they have to talk for 7 minutes, but like you said, I wrote 4 books, so now you're going to get the Cliff's Notes of the Cliff Notes. And thank you for inviting me on the show. I appreciate it. My story, first of addiction, is very textbook when you look at it. I was taken care of, babysat when I was very young, while my parents were both elementary school teachers. While they were at school, I was babysat by a woman who actually came highly recommended to them. But this house was a house of horrors. I suffered a lot of emotional abuse there. I suffered a lot of mental abuse there. And perhaps worse, I suffered some sexual abuse there. I was at this house for 6, 7 years. This was the place where I developed a lot of my coping skills, a lot of my survival skills, and they were very poor, if you could even call them survival skills at all. I don't know that survive, just take it, just take it, just take it is a survival skill, but that's what I learned. And unfortunately, I left there about 8 years old. The survival skills and the coping skills of an 8-year-old boy are not that an 18-year-old or 28 or 38-year-old should have, but that's what I brought through me with life, unfortunately. When I was 12 years old, I had an older cousin expose me to hardcore pornography through a couple of the well-known magazines. And I will tell you, I was an addict within a minute or two. This was not a thing that grew over time. This was something where it was like a light came down. It was like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that I have just found something that is so instantaneously made me feel so good. And I knew I had to get more of it immediately. And I'll tell you, the only other time I felt this way was 2 years later when I was 14 years old and I got drunk for the first time. I realized, oh my God, I now have a friend. I now have something to make me feel good no matter what's happening. And now I have 2 of these things. So looking at that time of my life, 14, 15 years old, I ride my bike home from school every day if I don't have some kind of after school activity or sport. I found a video store. This was back in the mom and pop days before Blockbuster and Movie Gallery took over, and we were still getting VCR tapes instead of DVDs. And I found one that would rent pornographic movies to me. And I found a convenience store, a little independent one down the road that would sell beer to me. So my life from 13, 14 years old up until probably 17, when I got a car and a job, was coming home from school, 2 porno tapes in my backpack, 4 or 5 beers in my backpack, and I would watch one tape and drink half the beers right after school. And then after my parents had gone to sleep at night and my brother had gone to sleep at night, I had a VCR and a TV in my room. I would watch the other porno tape, and at that point, drink the other 2 beers, which were warm. So that was, kind of gross for anybody who's had warm beer. So I kind of went through life at that point with these 2 addictions. They were addictions from the day I tried them. They were always there to make me feel better, whether I was in high school or going through college or, into my professional and adult private lives, they were always there, and they continued to get worse and worse and worse and worse. I was able to hide my pornography addiction quite well, not just from colleagues, but when I went and met my wife, or the woman who would become my wife at 26. I was able to hide it from her. She was like many forward thinking women who didn't have a big problem with pornography, watched some of it herself, but she had no idea just how much I was using when she wasn't home, or when it was very late at night after she went to bed. Um, and then ultimately, I kind of hit the point of addiction known as critical. That's the last year and a half of my life. I got to the point where I was screwing everything up at work. I was actually a city councilor at that point, and I screwed that up as well. I didn't run for a second term because I shouldn't have even been there. But I was very well known in my community. And then on March 20th, 2014, the Maine State Police showed up at my door and arrested me for possession of underage pornography, which absolutely took me by shock. But it turned out that in the previous 6 months, I'd begun going into chat rooms to talk to women. And if I could get them into a private chat room, just them and I would try to get them to, show me different parts of themselves or masturbate themselves. And it turned out that one of these women was a minor, and the police arrested me for this. I obviously, my world exploded, imploded, fragments everywhere. I don't know what word you want to use, but that was actually, looking back, the greatest day of my life. I saw those police officers as devils coming to ruin everything. But now that we are 8.5 years later, I see them as angels who came to my door. Within 3 weeks, I was in rehab in California for alcoholism. I was out there for 10 weeks, came home, did a ton of reading, did a ton of therapy with my therapist while the legal case went through courts. And I got to the point, and my therapist agreed with me, that probably a rehab for the pornography addiction would be a good idea. So I went to Texas in the summer of 2015 for, that was 7 weeks. Really got to work on the trauma side of stuff there, because I'd already been clean from porn for almost a year at that point. But I went and did the trauma work I needed to do there, got that ball rolling. That was when I decided I wanted to start helping other people. Unfortunately, I ended up in jail for about 6 months, but that was where I did the first draft of my first book. And since I've got out, like you mentioned at the top, I've written 4 books. I've done a TED Talk. I have appeared at universities, libraries, colleges, mostly before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I got certified as a pornography addiction coach, a betrayal trauma coach, and I'm also a therapeutic disclosure specialist. I found that I really have a niche, and I really love working with people one-on-one, hopefully to get them not to be at the point I was if they're porn addicts, or to help explain what's going on if they are the spouse or the partner of an addict. Those are the 2 groups I deal with now. Um, I've given more interviews about pornography addiction in the last 5 years than anybody on earth. If somebody else has done more, let me know. But this is what brings me to today. And today I am a much happier, healthier version of myself, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, than I ever have been. And I hate the fact I lost my 20s. I lost the first half of my 30s to these illnesses. But I'm hoping that, by being on your show, by being out there doing what I'm doing, there will be less people who end up as pornography addicts, or people who are at least aware of it and get some help before they wait too long, like I did.
Wow.
So there's 3 hours we can talk about.
Oh, guys, I told you, buckle up. I mean, seriously, buckle up, because there is so much to unpack with Josh, and I don't know if we're going to have enough time, but we are going to dive deep into a lot of things that he just said. Because look, a lot of us suffer from what Josh went through, variations of degrees. A lot of people have suffered from, porn addiction. A lot of people have suffered from mental health, physical trauma, mental trauma, betrayal, arrest. I mean, guys, Josh, almost lost his freedom because of this illness. And we're going to talk more about that but I want to go back. I want to go back real quick and talk about the coping, right? You said something at a young age when you were being, sexually abused at a young age, and you just needed to just survive the day. Just survive the day was the common theme that I heard. And there's a lot of people, both on the men and women's side, that have gone through this trauma at a young age. Help us as you've been able to grow and identify that when growing up. Please take us into that space a little bit on how you were able to get through now, through all the therapy and what you've had to build, how you were able to, one, was it often? Was it all the time you were at your babysitters? Was it Monday through Friday? I mean, if you want to go that far, you can.
Yeah.
That's the first question. Kind of bring us into we don't want to know what happened. Just time frame would be great. And the second part is how did you, now the tools, have you been able to overcome that history of abuse that you experienced from 5 to 8?
Well, and I remember things starting around 5. They probably started earlier and they last right up until I left. And I'll also tell you that it's kind of crazy in that of the mental, emotional, and sexual trauma and abuse. It's the emotional and mental abuse that I think did a bigger job. I think that was what I had to deal with a lot more growing up. It was interesting because my parents, as I mentioned, they were school teachers. They came from very dysfunctional families. I think my father, between both his parents, there was like 8 or 9 step parents. On my mom's side, her mother was, clinically depressed, didn't realize it till later in life, but she had massive mental health issues. My grandfather was a workaholic who his dad died at 2 or 3. So who knows what that was like growing up in the first half of the 20th century, not actually having a father there and your mom going to work when that was totally different. My guess is that he got bullied a lot because he ended up being the police chief of our city. And that's something you hear about a lot of police officers, is that they were either very bullied when they were young, or they were the bully. Those are the two people who end up as police officers. But anyway, my parents were very conservative Catholics. They did not want to raise their children in the kind of environments they were raised in. So if you can imagine that one of those 1950s or 60s, nuclear family TV shows where everything is solved in 22 minutes. You've got your Ozzie and Harriets and Donna Reed show, and not even Brady Bunch. That's too radical. We're talking the conservative of the conservative, and that was my parents. So while my mom would let me watch a movie on HBO with Sylvester Stallone as Rambo blowing up 100 people, if a breast or a buttock was ever on the screen, oh, turn that off, turn that off, turn that off, turn that off. So it was a very conservative sexual environment at my house. At the babysitter's house, it wasn't that way. It was very open. There would be R-rated movies on television. They might walk around in their underwear. The daughter of the babysitter occasionally let me watch her change. She one time let me touch her breasts. And she was 20, 21 years old while I was 5 or 6. It has taken me a long time to say that was sexual abuse, because for a long time, it was the biggest sexual thrill of my life that I chased, actually, for a very long time. So I recall about 12 to 14 different sexual abuse incidents, either that took place to me, which is rare, took place to another child that I remember watching. There was one time where I was forced to join in on abusing a child that I remember. But my therapist and many other mental health people I've talked to have said, you can stop trying to remember stuff. You know what happened there. Is another story really going to help you get any deeper? So I've actually stopped that. So when you ask questions about was it Monday through Friday, I don't think so, but I don't know, because what I remember most is how mentally ill this woman is looking back in retrospect. Every floor in her home was carpeted. From the moment you stepped through the front door to her bathroom to her basement, everything was carpeted. And she would vacuum those carpets 5 to 6 times a day. And I would have to follow behind her, picking up any tiny pieces of lint. She needed them crystal perfect. And she would do things like comb my hair with one of those really hard plastic combs you got during school picture day, 20,
Right.
25 times a day, really hard. She called me George once I asked her why. And it was because she liked that name better than Josh. And I was just so scared she was going to go off at any moment. I let her call me George. And I remember her sharing a lot of stories of her youth that were not stories you should share with a child, about abuse that she suffered, sexual, physical, that mental, that kind of stuff that really stuck with me. That's why when I think back about her place, I don't think of the sexual abuse as much as I think of the fact that she clearly was OCD. She clearly had some other stuff going on that I don't know what it was, but she was not healthy. But like most kids in a situation where, you don't know what's going to happen if you tell your parents. One time I told my parents she did something wrong. My mom repeated it back to her, and all hell broke loose after my mom dropped me off. And I was placed in one of the back bedrooms in the pitch black for several hours. And I never knew whether it was going to be 15 minutes or 3 hours. I think that was where I learned to dissociate, was when I was in that room, because I literally can sit in a waiting room for 2 hours and not even recognize it still these days. Sometimes that's good. I can take a long road trip, and while I do pay attention to the road, I don't get antsy. It doesn't bother me. I know that I developed that coping method while I was there, and so yeah, that was a really rough time. But you got to keep in mind, as a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kid, I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have a lot of sense of right and wrong. I
Hmm.
don't have a lot of what you and I have now that could, and keep in mind, we're also going back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, when there was no such thing as mental health, pretty much still, unless you were completely batshit crazy. And nobody talked about it because there was no boo-boo you could see, so it didn't count. So I know why she went untreated. I know why I didn't tell my parents anything. And, it's one of those things where I look back now and I tell all of my clients, when we go and we work on resolving your past trauma, just keep in mind it's still trauma. It's no longer unresolved, it's just resolved. It's still there. I know what happened, but I can't change it. And I don't want to say I've come to peace with it, but I've come to understand it. And I've come to understand how it fits into the narrative of how I became the man I am today. And that's what I try to do in my coaching ultimately, is for you to get through this. I've seen it on every kind of level. You have to tell yourself the story of your life that is going to allow you to put a lot of this stuff to bed, to allow you to get through it in a way that you need, and then to go on and hopefully live a healthier life. The addictions are only symptoms of a bigger illness. That's what a lot of people don't recognize. The amount of people that come to me like, how long till I stop using pornography? And it's like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Everybody's different. But are you just going to switch to something else? Because if you don't want to go deal with that bigger stuff, you're going to be in trouble eventually again.
Say that point again, Josh. Say that point again about the symptoms. Say that.
Yeah,
Say
it's
that again because it's
addiction.
critical.
Yeah, addiction is only a symptom of a bigger problem. Because look at it this way. I was I was wrestling with the demons of the abuse, probably subconsciously, when my cousin showed me that pornographic magazine. I realized subconsciously at that point that the pornography, and then again later, that the alcohol was going to help me get through this stuff that happened to me at the babysitter's house. I was able to put it on a shelf and literally forget it. When it took about 2 months of therapy before I had this aha moment, everything happened at her house. These little snippets I was remembering, everything happened at this woman's house. And that was one of my major aha moments. But I used porn because that's what was available at the time. I used alcohol because that's what was available at the time. And I actually forgot what happened there. But I think what happens with addicts is that we solve this major problem. Maybe it's your mom or dad died. In my case, it was abuse. You know, other major traumas that happen to people, they happen to find a substance or a behavior that helps put that off to the side. But then, well, what happens if I just have a bad day at school? Or what happens if you have a bad day at work and you're feeling like crap and you go home and you're angry and you're just not, I just would rather feel like my old self. Well, what do? You go onto the computer, you grab a magazine, you grab a videotape, you pop in pornography, you find yourself a beer, and now you are medicating with these things with incidents that are not going to create trauma. It's just it's just a matter of, well, if my porn and my alcohol helped me through this horrible stuff, it's got to do the trick on the day-to-day stuff, right? And then so you start using it frequently and more frequently, and it starts to actually, you know, the neuroplasticity in your brain starts to change, and it starts to, you know, move, and you become a slave to the addiction. Your dopamine receptors, oxytocin, serotonin, the endorphins, all of the happy chemicals in your head start to almost organize and fight against you and fight against your body, saying, we need this stuff, we need this stuff now. That's what urges and triggers are. You're just trying to keep putting this chemical back into your body that makes you feel better. It is very similar to alcoholics who need to drink to just stay alive at one point, at some points, where you just need to have that those happy chemicals going through you. And for most of my life, that was my relationship with pornography. All I want to say is that, you know, sometimes I'll talk to a guy and he'll believe that he's a porn addict, but he just uses a lot in between relationships. He uses it as a surrogate for a relationship. When he's in a relationship, he almost never watches. And that's when I have to say, you know, no, you're actually not an addict. You're using pornography like most people do. You may use it more in those times. Maybe you get a little depressed. Maybe you get a little hopeless feeling. But once you find another partner, it's gone. With porn addicts, that's not how we watch porn. It didn't matter what was on the screen to me. It mattered that I got those chemicals. If it was a white woman or a black woman or a tall woman or a fat woman, it didn't matter who was there. As long as I could get to those chemicals in my head through pornography to just get me through the next day. Again, here's the survival. I have to look at porn. I have to have some alcohol because that will help me survive till tomorrow. It's that simple.
Oh, guys, if you want, stop right now. Rewind the last 3-4 minutes of what was just said to help you understand that we're replacing one with the other. We're replacing something to help us cope. We're replacing a traumatic event with an event that gives us that feeling and says, if I just push it so far down in the depths of my belly, I don't have to remember it anymore. I'm going to keep it there. And we're going to keep it. We're never, ever going to open up that box again, ever. Like it is that box that's the metal box that's got chains around it. We're saying we're never going to touch it. But then as it starts to bubble back up to the surface, we've got to figure out how to press it down. As a child, like Josh said, he used porn and alcohol to help keep that suppressed down because he couldn't have those feelings of emotion or joy or blissfulness because that was attached to something that he didn't like. So he attached it to something that was, he could see. Like he said, he didn't care what was on. It was just the dopamine that was that rush. It was that feeling of, okay, this is what calms me. And I think a lot of people out there, a lot of us that have gone through some traumatic event in their life, figure out ways to cope with, ways to suppress, ways to say, I'm never going. Why would I want to go down this alley that all I know is I'm just going to get beat up the entire way? And then Josh said something key. He realized it wasn't the porn. He realized and identified that the woman was very, very much mentally ill. It's taken him years in therapy to get through to understand that. But that's the thing that I think is key, is understanding once Josh was able to start heal that time frame, he's been able to recognize. And you said something key again, which was you're not just done and freed from it. It's still there. But you understand and probably let me ask this question then. Does it ever self-manifest? Like when you're doing good and your promotion or you're bringing on clients, does that ever self-manifest? Does it ever try to come back? And if so, how do you say, no, I'm not allowing you to occupy space in my head?
I don't think so because I have kind of been an open book with it. I don't give a lot of interviews as in depth as I agreed to do with you. A lot of it now is just about porn addiction in general and not my story as much. But when my first book came out, that was my autobiography or my memoir. I did a lot of interviews at that point, and this was now 5 years ago. I was still healing, and I was still arguably in early recovery. That was when I dealt with most of that. These days, the only triggers I get, and very rare, are towards alcohol. I was in Chicago a month and a half ago with my son, and we went to a White Sox game. And I bought us tickets on the luxury level because I knew that he hates baseball, but I knew if I got him luxury level seats and we were waited on and it was nice, he'd be cool with it. So instead of me going in the bleachers where we were in the luxury seats. And there was a bar there, and I don't know what it was, if it was the smell of the ballpark, the green grass. I don't know, thinking back to Fenway Park, which I've been to 100 times in my life, when I was drinking heavily. I was very triggered there. They had a bar and they were like lining up Coronas with limes in them. And that was one of my favorite beers. And I was very triggered there. And I just had to go find my seat, not enjoy all the luxury stuff that goes on behind. Just tell my son, go fix me a plate and bring it. I had to sit outside in the park when nobody was basically there because I couldn't be at that bar. I knew that I knew that had I been alone, I would have been very, very tempted. I may have even left the ballpark if I was alone with my son. I knew he was enough motivation and incentive to not drink. But yeah, they still come once in a while. I still have drinking dreams once in a while.
Mm.
That's what happens with a lot of addicts. I've heard, people who use heroin, people who use meth, have dreams of using years after they've quit. And I'm over 8 years having not had a drink, but it's 100 degrees here today as we're recording this, and I can't tell you, a big mug of frosty beer sounds really good right now. It probably always will, but I've
Mhm.
developed the tools and the willpower and the discipline to not go that route. But yeah, it will never be completely gone.
Right. Give us, you know, two or three principles that you talked about, develop the willpower, the steps that you've taken. Give us two to three principles that you could share with, somebody who's listening to this and say,
Um,
these are two or three principles that have helped me get through and understand that what happened to me was not my fault, but it was not intended. Or just give us some principles that will help us get someone through that process.
Number one, and we talked about this, in me accepting that it's now resolved trauma, is the concept of radical acceptance. That's probably the cornerstone of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is part of what I went through. It's kind of an offshoot of cognitive behavioral therapy. Radically accepting the fact that we live in an unjust world, and there is always going to be bad and evil at the same time that there is good and justice. And I don't know if it was because I was raised by teachers and police officers. I don't know why it was, but I always was very go for the underdog, fan of justice, do the right thing. I mean, I watched pro wrestling when I was a kid, so maybe I got the good guy, bad guy story caught in my head. I don't know what it is, but um, there was a moment at my second rehab where a few people were not allowed to have guests because of how some other residents acted, and some of these guests were traveling from out of state. And I was so angry, even though I had no guests coming, nothing was going to phase me. 6 hours later, I was still pissed off at the whole place, pissed off at the world. And I noticed some of the people who were going to be affected, they'd already got through it and they weren't mad anymore. And I almost got mad at them because I was still carrying their resentments. I was still carrying the fact that this was not justice. And that was a real wake up call to me. A few people pointed out that I was fighting their battle for them, and they didn't ask me to. So I just had to learn radical acceptance, which is much easier said than done. The reality is what happened to me happened to me. I can't go back and change it. All I can do is learn about it and learn about how it affected me moving forward. And I sat with professionals and went through it and talked about some of those incidents and what happened. And I did some, inner child work. So the first thing that I think anybody needs in this process is radical acceptance. Sometimes bad people who do bad things get rewarded greatly. And unfortunately, we see it on TV every day. And, you can really be beaten down by the world if you don't just radically accept that it's I don't want to say chaos, it's an organized chaos, and you cannot control everything. That allowed me to let go of a lot of politics, a lot of social issues, a lot of other things in the world. Like I said, I just can't control. So that was my number one, was radical acceptance. My number two would probably be when I look myself in the mirror today, and this took a while as well, I see the person who's there. I see the genuine Joshua Shea. I don't see a hero who is out there fighting for pornography addiction education and helping to save guys. And I get tons of messages telling me that I'm helping people and I'm so wonderful. And that's great. And the old me would have loved that. He was an egotist who would have driven, dove headfirst into that. Don't edit that. I want people to see that. I would have dove headfirst into it. But I don't do that now because I'm not as self-centered, not as egotistical as I was. And the thing with that is that everybody has to take this on their own if they're asking themselves. I had people push me towards recovery, and I can tell you the people who helped me who are amazing, but ultimately it comes down to you have to fix this yourself. But you don't have to fix it for yourself. That's the one thing that I think so many therapists, so many counselors, so many people who teach at rehabs who haven't been addicts or just had a different story than mine. It's not a matter of you have to do this for yourself. That if I was going to do this for myself, I would have already cleaned myself up years earlier. What I had to do was find the need. And when people ask me, what's the most important thing I can do today to start getting sober? I say, find the need. What's more important than the addiction? And that doesn't matter whether you're a porn addict, an alcoholic, a video game addict, a gambling addict, a drug addict. If you can find one thing that's more important than the addiction and start to really focus on that. And when it comes to your addiction, if you can ask yourself, well, would I go look at this porn now if I knew that my wife would walk in and divorce me? Would I drink this bottle of vodka right now if I knew my kids would walk in and see me and give me a disappointed face? You have to find what's more important to you than the alcohol, than the drugs, than the porn, than whatever your addiction is. Because for the most part, addiction is addiction is addiction. Food addiction doesn't take place in your stomach. Cocaine addiction doesn't take place in your nose. Porn and sex addiction don't take place between your legs. All addiction takes place up in your brain. That's where the whole thing is going on. And when you look in the mirror, don't see somebody who's a hero, even if people are calling you that. Don't see somebody who's the worst person to have ever lived, even if people are calling you that. See who's really there. There are great things about you, and there are things that need to be improved about you. You are not the ugliest person that's ever been created. You are not the best looking person that's ever been created. Same with smartness, same with creativity, same with any attribute. When you look in the mirror, see who you really are. And that's to me the most important thing. I used to come on very early. I didn't have this message. I would come on podcasts right after my first book came out and should I be acting like an academic who did all his studying and knows his stuff? Should I be acting like a therapist because I know I've been through so much therapy with this stuff and I'm writing these books? Should I act like a therapist when I'm talking about this stuff? Because that's how I dealt with my life previous to my addiction. I kept my life compartmentalized. And there was the Josh that the family saw. There's the Josh the extended family saw. There's the Josh his employees saw. There's the Josh that the public saw when I was a city councilor. And I had all these silos of myself. And what I've learned is that they are just all part of me. And if I can see myself in the mirror, I can see all of those things in me for good or bad. And what I can do is make the decision to have today be a day I try to make myself a better person. I can't worry about it a year from now. I can't worry about what happened a year ago. I have today. So I guess those are the two things that almost anybody can use in life: radical acceptance, and you have today, and be honest